great pleasure now to bring on board a very special guest indeed, Mr. Sunil Mittal, founder and chairperson of Bharti Enterprises and the chair of B20 India Action Council on African Economic Integration. Mr. Mittal, it's a rare pleasure to have you on ET now. Thank you for joining us. It's history in making in India. G20, India's presidency, Vasudev Kutumbakam, everything seems to be coming together. So, do you expect any breakthroughs, and what kind of symbolic impact do you think this G20 summit will have on brand India?
Well, I know at the outset, I would say this has been an absolutely outstanding effort by the Indian Prime Minister Modi ji for having pulled together all the 20 countries, 20 members of G20 to vote on a consensus basis to include African Union as a permanent member of G20. This has been a long-standing desire of the African continent, their aspirations, their needs, and their attention to what is required to lift 1.4 billion people out of poverty have been on the forefront, yet they never got a seat on the table. As soon as India's turn came and India assumed the presidency of G20, our Prime Minister took upon himself to leave at least one big legacy that was focused on Africa. And I would say it's a great day for G20, great day for India, in particular, great endorsement of Prime Minister Modi's leadership on the global stage to have got this particular consensus through by inclusion of AU as a permanent member of G20. So let's start with that and say one big thing done, which will be remembered for the rest of G20's future. The second part I would say is I have seen many G20s. I've participated in a few. There's never been a G20 year like India's had, and probably there never will be one in the future, because our Prime Minister recognized that in today's fractured world where trust deficit is so low, this was a moment to seize, to bring together various countries who are very strong in their own right on a table to talk about India as one, as world being one family. And I think that message that you have just mentioned is a big message that will go out from G20. And regardless of what other discussions and debates and consensus comes out in the joint statement, this message that world is one family and India's old ethos of ensuring everybody living on this earth is taken care of will resonate for a very long time.
Mr. Mittal, since the African Union has entered G20 now, do you think this will have both short-term, medium-term and long-term implications when it comes to India's relationship, G20's relationship with the African Union, and especially bilateral ties and trade?
I would definitely hope so. India's had historic relations with Africa going over centuries. Indians have settled down in Africa, especially East Africa, over long, long decades. India, in some sense, had lost its engagement with Africa, giving space to countries like China. But in the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, India has changed its gears towards Africa, lifted its support towards Africa. And in the last, I would say, 10 years under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, we have seen much deeper engagement of India into Africa, our Exim Bank giving soft loans and grants to Africa, our industry and commerce minister, encouraging Indian private sector to go and set up bases in Africa. Airtel is a fine example, which operates in 14 countries. You will find Airtel flag flying in these 14 countries with great pride. And importantly, I am now hearing a lot from the African leadership at the highest level that they are looking to India to provide lead in the digital public infrastructure space, which India has utilized to a dramatic effect in lifting people from the difficulties, especially towards financial inclusion, giving government services and DBT, etc. So lifting of DPI from India and shifting it to Africa will be one of the biggest initiatives in the coming days and months ahead. And I think India's efforts towards AU being included as G20 into the G20 will further strengthen the relationship between African continent and India.
Mr. Mittal, I specifically remember we had a chat, and I'm going to quote you. It's like almost a decade-old conversation we had on some other forum, and you said, "Look, at heart, I'm an entrepreneur. I always go for where there is opportunity." You have business presence in Africa, and now that AU is part of G20, do you see for Bharti Enterprises this, in a sense, is the golden moment where your engagement with the African Union will only increase and intensify significantly?
Without a doubt. I mean, we are very, very emboldened. We have had a good experience in Africa. Growth rates are strong. Some economies have weakened and the currencies have depreciated. But on an overall basis, Airtel Africa is a fine example of how Indian companies and business houses can go and set up their own shops there and start to do a variety of things. Africa is truly the last continent of hope left in the world to produce more food, to provide critical minerals and metals to the world, which are much required in the new renewable energy program. I personally believe that in the coming years, you'll see Indian companies engaging more deeply with Africa. And there's no doubt, and as far as Bharti is concerned, we will further accelerate our efforts in doing more in Africa.
Just to summarize with one larger message for our audience, as an entrepreneur, what do you think will change because of G20?
Well, these large institutions have their own, dynamics. From time to time, you get breakthroughs. These are, all nations have to be patient in pushing through the agenda. There are always conflicting interests on the larger table. When you have war going on with one of the prominent members involved in that creates difficulties. When you have food supply chain disrupted, which is impacting half the globe, that has an impact in the discussions. In the end, if anybody can, to my mind, bring out a declaration which will have a reasonable amount of consensus, I personally think India's G20 will be one of those moments when we will be surprised in the positive that we have been able to come with a Delhi declaration which will probably reset the world order. With Africa Union coming in, I think we already achieved one big pillar. Will we get a few more agreements in the next 36 hours is yet to be seen. I remain hopeful. But there is no doubt that the G20 India moment will be remembered for a very, very long time for a variety of reasons, including AU coming into the G20 and possibly a lot more. But importantly, the message that we need to lower the temperatures around the globe. We need to increase trust between nations. The massive trust deficit that has been created in the last few years needs to be dealt with. I think this is a big achievement of India.
Really appreciate your time, and always a pleasure to have you on ET Now.
Thank you.